So, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for tuning in for our weekly Suitcase Stories conversation. My name is Cheryl Hamilton. I am the director of Suitcase Stories and have been with the International Institute of New England for 5 years. For those of you new to the International Institute, we are a 102-year-old organization that welcomes and assists refugees annually, about 2,500. We provide refugee resettlement, employment, education, legal services, and through our Suitcase program, we say that we amplify the voices of refugees and immigrants. We also, though, feature people who have connections to immigration, like Emma today, who is US born, like myself, but has worked in this field a long time. Suitcase Stories has multiple programs. When we're not at home, we're doing live shows on stage. But when we are at home, we're doing these conversations. We actually are still doing virtual shows. So if you're someone who's interested in getting your voice out there, please email us. We also have classes. We have a Suitcase Stories Unpacked series, which is where people learn the art of storytelling and are able to meet other people in their communities. So lots going on with us. But there's also lots going on at our sites. We are based in Greater Boston, Lowell, Massachusetts, and Manchester, New Hampshire. And I am here joined by a good colleague, Emma Tobin, who is the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships. Is that correct, Emma?
That is correct.
Excellent. So, and I know this is sort of a shift lately. So before we get into your work though, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came into this work of working in the refugee and immigrant field?
Sure, yeah. So I've worked with immigrants and refugees for about 15 years, really since when I was finishing up college. And I first kind of discovered refugee studies as an academic discipline kind of before I started working in a project-based capacity. So I had studied abroad in India when I was in college, and I was living in North India, and I met this community who I thought was really fascinating, and kind of by default learned that this was a refugee community and found that their stories of being displaced, which in some cases meant, you know, being second or third generation born into exile, but still very much identifying as refugees, was such an enormous part of who the community was and who the people were. And I was really fascinated and kind of mobilized by what I learned from them, and that sort of started my journey of working with displaced people.
And after college, you actually went back and worked abroad, correct?
Yeah, so I worked in South Asia between India and Nepal for about 5 years. I led study abroad programs for high school and college students, and I did a lot of volunteer work. I taught English to little tiny kids and to adults, but I mostly supported myself through US-based study abroad program coordination. And then I eventually went to graduate school, and I got a master's degree in refugee studies. And after that point, I did move back to Asia, but to Southeast Asia. And I lived and worked on the Thai-Burma border, working with labor migrants and refugees from Myanmar or Burma.
And what did that work look like for you?
Yeah, so it was an amazing job, actually. I loved that job. I was a trainer in a program that young adults coming out of Burma who worked for community-based organizations within their country or along the border would come to this program for a year, and they would learn project management skills. So how do you plan programming? How do you write grant proposals? How do you manage people? How do you do a needs assessment? And so I trained people in those skills, and then they used the skills to plan and implement community-based projects. So it was so satisfying because you were, you know, directly working with refugees and immigrants, but they were using those skills to kind of build up their own community. And this was at a time that continues when the U.S. Department for International Development was very invested in investing in Myanmar because it was starting to democratize and open up. So these kinds of programs were all over the place, and yeah, it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, I think a lot about these young people in college who aren't going to necessarily be able to travel abroad this year. I know some of my friends' children are really devastated because they were so looking forward to it. I know for me it was transformative. I got to work in the Parliament in London as a junior in college, and I mean, just incredible. But also we know this week that there's potential that the US is going to deny foreign students from coming to be able to continue to study in the US, over 1 million people. So it is every day a new challenge. What did you find hardest about that work? at the time? I mean, you were young and this was your early in your career.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at that point, I had worked for 5 years in South Asia, and then gone to graduate school, and kind of went back to Southeast Asia. I think for me, it's so much of my early work, my academic work, my study abroad work was really centered around the Tibetan exile community in India and Nepal. And I learned, I don't speak it well, but I spoke some Tibetan. I had a lot of Tibetan friends. I had a Tibetan community. I was very immersed in that refugee community. And so going and working on the Thai-Burma border was sort of the first time that I was really stepping outside of this comfort zone that I had developed, and saying like, okay, I don't speak any of this language. I don't really know anything about this culture, but they're the same issues of displacement and the same challenges that arise when you are living undocumented or living as a refugee in a camp are there. And so what does it mean here? And how am I just going to let myself be vulnerable and learn and open up? And it was really challenging, but really, really good. And from there, I feel like it kind of opened a world of, I want to be involved in projects supporting immigrants and refugees, and they can be from anywhere.
Right. So how did you make the transition back to the US? What brought you back, and then what were you doing when you got here?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a long story about why I moved back. But when I moved back, I wasn't sure it was for good. I thought maybe I was coming back for a little while and then going to go back overseas. But what happened is I got a job working for a refugee organization in Manchester, New Hampshire. And it was not the International Institute. It was an organization called ORIS, the Organization for Refugee and Immigrant Success. And they don't do resettlement, but they do a lot of post-resettlement services, really with an emphasis on refugee agriculture programming and youth programming. And so I was the associate director there. The majority of my colleagues were Somali, actually, but everyone except for I think 2 of us were refugees and immigrants. It was a really great experience. I've loved working in the city of Manchester, so vibrant and interesting. And it was the first time I really got to dig in and sort of see the benefit of working in my own country, because there were certain types of conversations I could be part of that, while working abroad, I was never really going to be part of. And you just had that sense of like, well, this is my community and I want to make it better. So I have there's a little more I can dig into here. So it was really eye-opening.
Yeah, except that's also what happened to me. I had every intention of working abroad most of my life, I was sure. And then Somali migration came to my hometown and fundamentally shifted how I saw the United States and the needs in the community. And so I share that with you. And then you joined the International Institute a couple of years ago. What year did you join?
Yeah, so I've been with IANE for just over 3 years now.
Right. And tell us about the work you're doing now in this new position.
Sure. So so I just started
It's
a new
recent.
role.
Or what do you understand to be your role?
Sure. Yeah, let's see if it's a tech. So a few weeks ago, I transitioned into a new role. And in this position, I am working with all 3 of our sites, so Lowell, Boston, and Manchester, to sort of develop and deepen partnerships that will allow us to expand programming in strategic ways. So we don't just want to expand for the sake of expansion. We want to expand in ways that are really good for our clients, really good for our sites, and lend themselves to financial sustainability. So obviously our funding landscape has really changed in the last few years under our federal administration and with all the wildness going on in the world. So we're looking to, build programs that support our existing work and that grow those programs. So that probably sounds kind of vague. A lot of what I'm going to be doing and what I already am doing is finding ways to build healthcare training programs and partnerships in various locations.
And you were telling me that that's sort of you've been surprised. It's been a really new interest of yours that you become passionate about. Tell us a little bit about that evolution.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have any background in medical care or healthcare. I actually feel in some ways a little squeamish about I couldn't be a healthcare provider. But a couple of years ago, I designed a program and wrote a grant to launch a certified nursing assistant training program in our Lowell. And it really was a response to a public requests for proposals, but truly it was a response to what our clients told us they needed and wanted, which in many cases were better jobs and careers in healthcare. People specifically wanted to work in healthcare. And then the need of the region, which is healthcare workers. I mean, it's just there aren't nearly enough, and especially for roles like certified nursing assistants, where there's a lot of turnover. It's a hard job. Not everyone wants to do that job. And so it was kind of this perfect coming together of the region's needs and our clients' desires and goals. And so we designed the program, we got the funding, and now we're heading into year 3 of that project. We've trained dozens of people to become certified nursing assistants. We're looking to expand the program. And at the same time, we've kind of used that to jump off and do other types of healthcare training. So we are working with another partner to train English language learners to administer medications. We've trained personal care attendants and helped people secure those jobs. So it's kind of opened up this whole new world for us. And not new world, I mean, we've always placed people in healthcare jobs, but I think deepened our relationship with that type of work. And I just have learned that I find it really, really satisfying. I mean, because it's helping our clients to get something in their own lives, which is so good for the broader community. So yeah, I love it. Surprise passion.
How long are these programs generally? Just in range and hours?
Yeah, so our CNA program, our Certified Nursing Assistant program, is 200 hours long. That's 100 hours longer than what the state offers, because what we do, we don't just recreate these programs. We take them and we adapt them for our audience, which is refugees and immigrants, English language learners. And so we really focus on what is the healthcare terminology you need to learn to be successful in these programs? What are the soft skills for the healthcare workplace that you're going to need to develop? What are your rights as a healthcare worker? So they're much broader than just the clinical training you would receive if you signed up at the community college, for example.
Right.
So
custom.
they're pretty in depth. I mean, our medication administration program similarly took the state issued course, which is 16 hours, and expanded it to 40 hours. So that's kind of our model. Take what the state offers, at least double it, so that a person with that extra barrier of learning English while they learn the content can still be successful.
That's awesome. So I love stories. Any clients that you remember or any moments from developing this that are going to stick with you?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of two ends of the spectrum here. One thing that's really exciting about the program is that we can enroll people of any immigration status. So we can, it's not just about refugees. That's awesome. But it is particularly satisfying when a person we've resettled as a refugee goes all the way through their services and to the point where they, become a certified nursing assistant and get that job. So, there's a woman who we've resettled her entire extended family in waves. They've just come over the course of several years. We're all in Lowell. Her English was quite strong when she got here, but we worked with her on her English. We worked with her, to get her first job. We worked with her to get her kids into school, all of the steps. And then, she eventually enrolled in the program. She did the program. She worked super hard. It took a lot of effort, but she passed the test. She became credentialed, and then she got an amazing job with one of our strongest partners, the Lowell Community Health Center. So it was just sort of that full, the full story where you're like, wow, like from point A to point Z, she's been with us. So
I was going to say, the Lowell Community Health Centers, I mean, one of our favorite and most special partners. The work they do is just incredible. The fact that they have a refugee center for people to get the targeted and custom healthcare they need. So yeah, I mean, you and I both love Lowell. We love Boston and Manchester too, but it's something special of what we do up there. So I do love stories. And I don't know if you volunteered to tell a suitcase story. It's kind of hard to remember. I feel like I asked you a couple times because of Suitcase Stories, again, we believe that everyone has a migration story, whether you're someone just that moved within the country and had that experience of being an outsider, or you're someone who traveled abroad and came back and your life was transformed by it, or you are an immigrant, right? And whether that's experience has been positive or challenging or all of it, right? We look for those unique stories. And so I approached you and I was like, do you want to tell a story? What was your first reaction?
I had a really mixed reaction because, so as an undergrad, I studied anthropology and I worked with refugees, but I did a dual major in creative writing. And so writing is a huge part of my life. And in that sense, and also writing creative nonfiction. So in that sense, I was like, oh yeah, this is totally within my wheelhouse. But then when I started understanding what it was, I realized it's something very different. The way tell a story is really different than how you write a story. And I've now heard a lot more stories from you and other colleagues, and I think that there's a real art to it, and it did not come very naturally to me. So I was sort of excited and wanted to do it, and incredibly nervous.
What did you see as the difference? That's great. I'm curious.
Well, I think you can use really beautiful poetic language when you're telling a story, but you have to do it. You have to be more careful in how you do it, or it sounds really forced, I think. And I'm talking about people who know what they're doing, not myself. But when you're writing, I mean, there's a lot more room, I think, to be poetic or to use certain kinds of language that just don't lend themselves to being spoken out loud as easily. And there's, that you want to seem natural. You want to seem like you're telling a story, and there's a performative element to it that just isn't part of the written word.
I didn't know that you went to school for creative writing. I went to school for documentary writing. And my application said, "I can't write, help me." Literally. I'm sure there was more words than that, but that was the opening line. And so I feel reversed from you. I find that really, really hard. But speaking comes more naturally, which I think why it's a reciprocal relationship. So you chose a story about being in an airport in Thailand, right?
In India,
India, right?
Yeah, it's from earlier in my career. I told a story about. It was actually not even in my career. It was an undergrad, and I did 6 months of research in North India. I went to a college where your whole final year was just kind of doing an independent project, and so I spent 6 months in North India doing anthropological research with Tibetan refugees about identity documents and citizenship and what it meant to be a refugee in India, and the whole sort of system of citizenship in that community that they had built, which was fascinating to me. So anyway, I had all this information in my head, and I was in this airport in North India, and this little girl who was Tibetan was trying to go through immigration using one of these documents, these refugee documents, and I knew all about these documents. So like this, overconfident young white American, I thought I could help, and I stepped in. And long story short, I basically got accused of human trafficking. They thought I was trying to traffic this child out of India. And it was very terrifying and very humbling to learn that I was not helpful by getting involved.
Right. And both of you ended up getting safely onto a flight, if I recall.
Safely onto a flight. She flew to the US and she reunited with her family, and all ended well. But it was a very terrifying 5 hours or so.
Right. But I think the fact you're so self-reflective in it of what does it mean to help and to think about those systems is really important. I'm sure in my life I've been in this similar situation where you're like, what am I doing? And I once had to interview a Congolese woman who had been a victim of sexual assault in Kenya in a refugee neighborhood. And I just walked in ready to do the interview into a tea shop. And I was like, "Hi, I'm here." And she gave me this look like, "Get out." Because by being there, other people, not reporters, but other people were going to ask her what she was being interviewed for. And I realized I already damaged my relationship from the beginning. So we ended up having to get a driver, go get her. And then she and I drove to the outskirts of the neighborhood and literally sat in the base of the seats so that no one saw us talking. And so I think we just take for granted, particularly as white women, how we can navigate the world. And we know that right now with all the conversations that are important and are happening. Yeah. So how did it feel when you walked on stage in Manchester?
Well, I remember that I was sometimes when I have to speak publicly, I get kind of shaky. I mean, if I have to be honest, I'm even a tiny bit shaky right now. And I remember when I walked onto the stage in Manchester that I was really worried that my legs were visibly shaking. So I was really, really nervous. But then once I got up there, you go into kind of like I would have felt like I went into like a trance state and couldn't really see the audience and didn't really know what was happening. So I take it was fine in the end, but I was very nervous.
You were really good, honestly. But speaking of the shaking knees, I learned the hard way. I had never wore heels until our opening Suitcase Stories show. I never wore heels on stage, but I forgot to change before I walked onto our inaugural show in Concord, and they were really high. And I saw the video. I was shaking only because I was doing this because I get excited when I talk. So now with every other suitcase teller, I'm like, just wear flats. Just wear flats. Yeah,
I think that's our platforms. I shouldn't have been.
Yeah. But we've had over 200 people tell a story now. Why do you think it's important, and what have you taken away just from listening to them?
Yeah. Well, so I know you had sort of asked me in advance to reflect on, you know, a story that stuck with me or a particular person that stuck with me. And I was thinking about it. And the reality is every time I have heard one, especially one of my colleagues tell a story, it slightly shifts the way that I see him or her. It opens up like another layer of personhood. And even sometimes with people who I know really well, or who I think I know really well. And I know one of our colleagues has become incredibly involved in storytelling, Chris Coe, and it's just, you know, it's just this whole other side of him, the passion that he feels for, and literally the way his face looks when he tells the story. It's just another version of Chris. And so I think that I don't know, it literally creates a space for people to reveal some other way that they are in the world, because as professionals, we're used to talking to each other in certain ways and about certain things, and I really love when I get to just see this little glimpse into someone's life through their story.
Yeah, it's I mean, storytelling is all about empathy and human connection, and I agree. I mean, particularly in work like ours that is so active and so challenging, to take that time, I actually think is incredibly valuable, because it makes the challenging parts of the work itself a little bit easier, because we're there for each other in an even deeper way, and we also know our strengths and our challenges just as individuals, right? I was really proud. Every year, the International Institute hosts a Golden Door Award, where we honor someone who's been incredibly impactful in the immigrant refugee, well, in their careers, but they're immigrants themselves. And last year, we honored the president of Northeastern, and we were gathered, and Northeastern volunteered to make the Suitcase Story display. And when I walked in, I was like, that's fancy. It had suitcases and posters and videos. I had no idea it was going to look that awesome. But for me, there was a moment that unexpectedly, all the suitcase tellers from our staff who had done it were standing underneath the sign together. And I just looked around, I thought, yeah, these are the people I know really well. So I guess we could both do a commercial for our staff that are listening, or people that are in the field. We would love for you to share your stories too. And Emma said it was you know, it can be nerve-wracking, but usually people walk off stage feeling really satisfied. I also think it's really good for our clients.
Definitely. And I think the process, something I didn't know going into it is that it's not just like, hey, do you want to tell your story? Okay, go figure it out, and then we'll bring you onto the stage and make sure the lighting is right. I mean, you're really supported throughout the process, because it is a specific craft. There's a specific thing that you're doing when you're telling a story. It's your story, but you're kind of learning this craft. And so I felt really supported by you, Cheryl, and by the other storyteller I worked with, who helped me sort of take the thing I had written and turn it into something that was meant to be told. So it's cool. You're learning a new skill.
Yeah, I love it, because we get to, I mean, our clients, our colleagues, I always joke that they're like, I don't know if I have a story. I'm like, every week in this field is story making. I mean, right now with COVID-19, I mean, to have the public understand what it looks like to help people both virtually and just show up in their lives. I mean, we just had a conversation with a bunch of refugees on staff up in Manchester, clients up in Manchester, and to watch our staff navigate and still try to create a really human connection, and to be excited when they saw them on screen, to make sure they could get on screen. I mean, I just think for me, the amount of stories that are going to come out of this time are going to be immeasurable. So, but speaking of time, we are wrapping it up. We're getting near the end. I want to thank everybody. Hopefully people had some lunch. I hope you come back. We're doing these every Wednesday at noon. But Emma, congratulations on the promotion. Congratulations on the programs you've built. And then I will add a little personal note, which is you were supposed to get married, and COVID-19 threw a little wrench in that. But we would certainly celebrate you and your future husband, because you're still going to do it.
We're still going to get married. We're just going to do it in a very tiny way.
Yeah, well, it will be a big day for you no matter what. So congratulations on that as well. We like to celebrate those things too. So for everybody else, if you would like to stay in touch, you can learn more about Suitcase Stories at suitcasestories.org. If you would like to watch some of the videos or previous conversations like these, or get additional resources, we have a group called Suitcase Stories Circle. It's some of our closest supporters. You can subscribe to that for an annual membership and receive new content each month. But also you can visit INE's website to find out what's going on with our programs right now. We are starting to be able to, we've actually been able to continue most of them online, but we're still working that through. And we have ESOL classes, the skills training that Emma's talking about. So you can definitely visit and connect with that, as well as our legal services. But thanks, Emma, and thanks everybody else who joined.
Thank you,
Have
Cheryl.
a great afternoon.